During this video I will be explaining interview different types and the techniques used in interviews. I have chosen 5 of my favourites to focus on.
I think not difficult because
containing the types of questions asked, interview style, the structure, and also the communication skills. My first interview I have chosen is the Robert Pattinson magazine interview. This interview is light-hearted. We know this because Robert Pattinson is one of the main characters from Twilight, so we know as the audience he is not going to be interviewed on politics or the royal family, as he isn't that important. This is what makes the interview light-hearted. Also, the questions asked are as if there is a chat taking place, which also showcases the light-hearted style. Magazine interviews are mainly light-hearted, as usually music artists or film casts are usually the ones being interviewed. Magazine interviews aren't a good way of showing how the interviewee feels, as we can't see their responses or emotions as to how they feel about the questions being asked. This interview is light-hearted as the interview is from a teen magazine. Mixtures of open and closed questions are used within this interview. An open question is a question answered with more than a yes or no answer. As the magazine says, what attracted you to the role of Edward? This is an open question. A closed question is the opposite to open. It can be answered with either a simple yes or no answer. The other question asked in the magazine, have you ever loved someone like that, is an open question, but can also be answered with a simple yes or no. My second interview I have chosen is a Charles Moore Radio 5 live interview about Lady Thatcher.
Charles Moore joins us, Baroness Thatcher's official biographer. Good morning. This is going to be a very poignant, difficult day for you, is it? Well, it will be poignant. I think not difficult because
this interview is hard news, as it is about 2 very important people within the UK, Margaret Thatcher and journalist Charles Moore. We know the interview is hard news also because the way the interview is spoken, it's very formal and serious. The interview contains a variety of questions, including multiple and open. A multiple question is a range of questions asked on the same topic to gain a conversation. These types of questions are used as the interviewer is gaining strong interest. We know the interviewer is interested as he is questioning for more information. At the very beginning of the interview, multiple questions are asked when the continuous conversation is taking place. There are also more multiple questions asked throughout the interview. The interview contains plenty of open questions. This is an example. What would she have thought of the proportion status paying for this? This question is being asked as the interviewer is asking for more information from Charles Moore. Charles builds up confidence towards the end of the interview as he changes the tone of his voice and also begins to add more detail into his speech, known as confidence building. My final interview I chose was a news interview on Boston bombings with FBI agent Martin Reardon.
Well, thank you very much, Andrew. And joining us now via Skype from Qatar is Martin Reardon. He's Vice President of the Soufan Group and a 21-year veteran of the FBI. And before joining the Soufan Group, Mr. Reardon served as Chief of the FBI's 24/7 Terrorist Screening Operations Center. I can't think of a better guest to get tonight here. Martin, thank you very much for a few minutes. I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Questions have already emerged, Martin, that say, listen, the FBI already flagged this guy as early as 2011, and when he went over to Russia in 2012, that he should have been flagged. And it's already been argued by the head of the Homeland Security Department in the House that he was being further radicalized, they think, overseas. Certainly should have been interviewed when he came back. Isn't that part of SOP? If the guy's already on your radar and he goes back to a place where you're concerned the situation could go from bad to worse, when he comes back in the country, due diligence would suggest you ask him a few questions.
I think you have to look at what the actual procedures are here, how the FBI handles these. And they actually work according to the Attorney General guidelines, directs them how to conduct national security investigations. There are 1 or 2 likely scenarios that would have happened in this case. Based on the foreign government information that Tamerlan Tsarnaev was being radicalized, the FBI did 1 of 2 things. They would have opened up a threat assessment, which is nothing more than when you receive information that an individual, an organization, a group may pose a national security risk for the United States. Threat assessments, there are limited things that the FBI can do. They can do internet checks, check the person online. They can do database checks either through the FBI or other federal, state, local agencies. They can do a non-pretext interview. They cannot do any of the more sophisticated or traditional investigative techniques that are used in other cases. That's the threat assessment. Another option would have been to open up a preliminary investigation. In this case, again, the predicate being the receipt of foreign government information that this individual could have been or may have been a member of a terrorist organization. It was a preliminary investigation. A few things to keep in mind. Most of the standard investigative techniques can be used, but those that require court orders and some other sensitive techniques cannot be used. So there are restrictions there. If at the time, in 2011, they did not identify those specific and articulable facts, they would have had no choice but to close the matter.
If there's one thing from the outside that you saw throughout this investigation, and I know it's easy to Monday morning quarterback, but I'm going to ask you to do it since everybody in Washington seems to already have. What do you think, if one thing could have been done different in the investigation, what would it have been?
I'll say, if you're going to use the analogy of Monday morning quarterback, I'm going to say that, my team won. I think this was a textbook investigation from Monday through Friday when when the second subject was arrested. Tragic, it was. But this was a good example of the state of Massachusetts, the law enforcement agencies in Boston and the surrounding communities, and the federal government working closely together to resolve this question or to resolve the investigation. So I would say it was textbook. There was some breaking ground in this where the public was relied on so heavily to provide whatever video and still photos they had of the marathon, the venue. Breaking ground when the governor and the mayor asked the population of Boston to remain in their homes that day because they had basically channelized, they had a good idea of where the younger Tsarnaev brother was, keep everybody indoors. I thought this was a textbook investigation. In any investigation, there are always lessons to be learned afterwards, but I didn't see any mistakes that were made. I thought it was a calculated and a very good decision to release that photo Thursday afternoon.
And finally, Martin, we know that Mr. Tsarnaev had more than a few stops, more than just to see his family in his most recent visit, and they're already investigating, in effect, his itinerary. Real concern here, I've heard from some folks in the intelligence community, is God forbid there were organizations behind this. Then it opens up a whole host of geopolitical concerns. Is that the worry, that these weren't just two, disaffected brothers who carried off a tragic atrocity? I guess the big worry is that this thing could grow bigger than just the two of them.
Well, it can, and of course, this is what this is the next step that they want to determine, and this is why the president decided to use the Hague for the investigation and to utilize the public safety exception to Miranda. Determine if there were any other accomplices, either in the Boston area, in the greater New England or Mid-Atlantic region, or overseas. Were there other accomplices who are prepared or were prepared to conduct terrorist attacks in the United States or anywhere abroad? So there is that chance. The question remains, were they lone wolves, just the two of them, or were they part of a terrorist organization or another cell that might be operating here in the United States? Did they get outside assistance in terms of planning, financing, or training? So these are all things that the investigation is going to need to determine. These are the questions that have to be answered. How were they radicalized? When were they radicalized? Was it self-radicalization? Were they influenced by others? Was it through the internet? What caused these brothers to commit this act?
Martin Reardon, great job. I appreciate a few minutes. Thank you so much.
This interview is an investigation. We know this as FBIs are known to investigate in certain situations. This interview is about the Boston bombings in America. During this interview, we know the interviewee is engaged as he nods his head at the interviewer. This is known as active listening. Long open questions are asked throughout the interview. There are no other questions used as this interview is an investigation. The interviewer is finding out as much information as this is an investigation, and he does this by a range of open questions which the FBI answers. This interview took place so more information could be told on the news so everyone could find out the latest updates on the bombings. Throughout this interview, the FBI sounds and looks very confident with his speech, as he is confident on his topic. Altogether, all of my interviews are completely different, as I chose my first as a magazine, my second as a radio, and my third as a news video. The best way of presenting an interview, I believe, is a TV or news show, as you can see the interviewee's responses and gestures to the questions being asked, which is interesting for the audience. Whereas if you choose a magazine or radio, it is hard to understand how the interviewee is feeling, and this can cause the audience to lose interest.